Hey guys, so I made a much longer video explaining my topic in depth as I learned it, but I wanted to kind of quickly make like a sub 10-minute explanation just for the presentation side so you guys aren't forced to watch a 48-minute video or fabricate a response to my work. I chose the topic of prohibition and bootlegging, so really prohibition and smuggling within Vermont. And what I wanted to look at was the far-reaching history of prohibition in Vermont, because we didn't just have the federal prohibition of 1920 to 1933. Vermont had a further back-reaching, in-depth temperance movement, which was the anti-drinking and anti-saloon movement. And also we were the second state to ever enact prohibition, which is something that I learned, but I knew that Vermont had periods of different levels of state prohibition. So the in-depth and complex history on that was actually a lot more than I had ever realized in terms of laws and politics, and also the fact that it kept changing and ebbed and flowed, but maintained a constant, varying level of prohibition from 1853 to 1933. Now, what happened is the federal prohibition uniquely affected Vermont because we were already so poised with the smuggling and manufacture illegally because we'd been dealing with it for so long, kind of uniquely poised to end up being a smuggling route. I also wanted to look at things like the economics, like how much money could be made doing it, how much money did your average person make back then, why was Vermont so uniquely situated. Did it play into Vermont being underdeveloped compared to neighboring states, us staying very rural, making us a better smuggling route, etc.? How did everyday people view the law and the different sides to it? Who was doing the smuggling and how? I learned a lot of information about the different types of boats used on Lake Champlain, the different enforcement areas, what kind of cars and how, what kind of routes they took. And also you find that there's different levels of how much people are involved. Like you have people that might a few times smuggle a small amount just to make a few bucks. Some people that just do extra work like loading and unloading boats and cars. And you also end up with the people who make just these absolute fortunes on it, who are doing it for the purposes of making huge amounts of money, but also some of them for the thrill, and sometimes a combination in between. And sometimes people who never engaged in any smuggling or illegal drinking even still were willing to help the moonshiners simply because, well, moonshiners or smugglers, simply because they didn't really agree with the law. And a lot of times it was their friends and neighbors who were doing the smuggling. Other times there were Vermonters who worked in enforcement, and even there was different levels, such as local law enforcement who had to make a show of doing the enforcement, but at the same time still had to live in the town and didn't want to make too many people upset. And there's people who went and worked for the federal enforcement arms that opened up, such as the Lake Champlain Boat Patrol. That was an arm of the U.S. Customs Service that opened up on Lake Champlain for the duration of Prohibition. So it was their job to catch the smugglers coming down through using the lake to transport from Canada and to go into New York and different parts of Vermont. In an era when the minimum wage was 16 cents an hour, some people could make a profit of well over $20 from smuggling one case of beer. So obviously that was a tempting profit. And one guy had said that he made in a solid month of smuggling more than he could make in 2 years of farming. So even just doing it briefly or once in a while for yourself or for others, the amount of money to be made was very tempting to set up kind of a safe, kind of a safety net for your family, or even just provide if you're struggling. And a lot of people just, they wanted to drink for different cultural or social or personal reasons, or just because they didn't think it was fair that they were told not to. And a lot of people were willing to break what they saw as a very unjust and overreaching law in order to be able to drink. Some of the methods of transportation involve cars. Some involve people using horse and buggy and hiding under a hay wagon. There was vehicles with hidden compartments. There was a submarine barge that would float under the water so that it could remain hidden during the day, and then they would tow it at night. They started using boats with the shelves right up top, not hiding it, but just so you could quickly ditch it if you did get caught driving down the lake at night in that boat. These are a lot of the fascinating things I learned, and I used a lot of oral history telling that is now recorded online, easy to access, a book about Prohibition that was written by a local author. I cross-referenced some different sources of books, including an old book that was published in the late era of federal prohibition, which was a meeting of different Vermonters who wanted to keep traditional recipes and brewing pieces alive, and also compiled that knowledge into a book alongside with a number of opinion pieces on why prohibition was wrong. And they published that book, and it gained some fame nationwide. I didn't find an actual copy of the book. It's an old book and didn't have very many copies, but I was able to cross-reference some of the information that's been recorded and discussed elsewhere. And also in terms of economics, some of that data is available out there. Some of the first-hand accounts give the actual numbers. Some of the first-hand accounts give the amount smuggled, which in one case they said Rouse's Point, New York, which is not too far across the lake from us here in Vermont. In September of 1924, they confiscated 96,940 bottles or something like that. That is just what they found, and that is just 1 month of 1 year of prohibition that lasted for 13 years. So that gives a little bit of a scale of how much alcohol was being transported from Canada into the United States. Some came offshore from the Atlantic Ocean, a lot was made, but that just kind of gives you an idea of the scale of the smuggling that was happening. I also cross-referenced some pieces written about the transition from wooden bridges to iron bridges in the United States, and specifically in Vermont, because it showed the delayed transfer to modern infrastructure in Vermont, which kind of tied into some of the economic activity pieces that led to prohibition, and some that was limited by prohibition, as well as why Vermont stayed so rural for so long during prohibition and really through about World War II. So I went through the topic as in-depth as I could and cross-referenced a lot of different historical material. I also made a pretty in-depth study of maps. I've always enjoyed maps anyway. I'm including this video and also my maps and images. I hope you guys enjoyed this topic, even a fraction as much as I have, because it's certainly been fun for me. Alright, thank you.